Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to go over the tolerances assignment because most of you are not understanding tolerances. So let's start with general tolerances. So in Onshape or Inventor or any other CAD modeling program, when you're in a drawing and you place a measurement, it assumes it is a general dimension. And that means it's whatever the drawing is defaulted to. Onshape tends to default to 3 decimal places. And usually with general dimensions in a drawing, you would have a little text box somewhere that indicated the number of decimals on the measurement and what the tolerance was for that. So if it had 1 decimal place, it's plus or minus 0.2. If it has 2 decimal places, it's plus or minus 0.1. And if it has 3 decimal places, it's plus or minus 0.05. So to say that general tolerances have to be exact is inaccurate, and a lot of you were writing that. It is assumed a dimension. It's kind of like a dimension set for all of the measurements. Okay, let's talk about calculating the upper lower limit and the tolerance. So in this case, in this example, they show a 1.5 plus or minus 0.5 measurement, and this is a bilateral tolerance applied to that measurement. It means that as long as it's within plus or minus that amount, you're okay. If it's outside of that, it's bad. So to calculate the upper limit, you take 1.5 plus your tolerance, 0.05, and that gives you an upper limit of 1.55. If you find your lower limit, you take the measurement target minus 0.05 and you get 1.45. Those are your limits. And to calculate the overall tolerance, it's the difference between these two measurements. And if you look at that plus or minus 0.05, that is going to be 0.1. And you can find it 2 different ways, but it's the difference between the two measurements. So that's the tolerance that it's specifying. Okay, let's look at limit dimensions. Look at the layout of this measurement. If you see this format on your measurements, it is a limit dimension. And with a limit dimension, you establish a lower limit and an upper limit. And it has to be within those two numbers. That's the only acceptable one. There's not a center target. It's just saying it has to be between these two values. Bilateral tolerances include a plus or minus sign. Okay, and then it gives you a tolerance value or a limit value. So in this case, we have 2 different ones here. We already talked about the 1.5. So notice how the decimal place, and I saw this on a few people did this. There's 2 decimal places here, and there's 2 decimal places here. Sometimes there's 3 decimal places here. The smaller this number is, the more expensive it is to produce. And in this case, it has 3 decimal places and 3 decimal places. So this is saying that this depth can be 1/4 of an inch plus or minus 3/1000ths of an inch. So it could go up by 0.003 or down by 0.003. All right, that's bilateral. Unilateral tolerances look like this. They have the target value and then a lower value, which is usually 0, and a upper value. And it depends on if you're talking about a hole or if you're talking about a feature. So, but usually one side of this is 0, and that's kind of saying from this point, you can go from 0.5 up to 0.504 is what this is saying. So it's setting one side is set at 0, so it's got to be exactly, it's kind of like the smallest it could be is 0.5, it can be up to 0.504 for the largest size. And that's a unilateral tolerance. It's kind of a center and to the right or center and to the left value. Okay, and that's just a real quick overview. So what I was looking for dimensions that showed a general dimension that was whatever Onshape spit out, and then a second general dimension that included an additional significant figure, and you would choose that by using the dimension palette and extending from 0.123 to 0.1234. The next one was a limit measurement. So it should have this format, which would be selected from your dimension palette. The next would have been a bilateral tolerance. It would have had this format, and also that would have been a selection from the dimension palette. And the last one was a unilateral tolerance. Wait, before we talk about that, I had some of you put plus or minus 0. That would be extremely expensive to generate, to manufacture, because you're not specifying a tolerance. Notice how that's not 0, it's plus or minus some variance from this number. The last one was unilateral tolerance, and it has this format, and again, that is a selection on the dimension palette. That gives you some information to consider. These were in some of the submissions. I did not see clear understanding of the content of this slideshow, and that's why some of the grades are the way they are. Thank you. Have a good day.